If you want to help out and support the channel, there are a few things you can do. Go check out Flipside Gaming and use the promo code VOIDMAGE in all caps. This will get you 10% off all orders $10 or more. And if you go shopping on tcgplayer.com, go use my affiliate link in the description below. That way all purchases you make will go towards helping the channel. And lastly, go check out my Patreon. It's a more direct way that you can help the channel while also getting some more interaction. I appreciate all of your support. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Hello everyone, welcome to another themed commander deck video. This time I'm choosing Bloodborne, the PlayStation 4 exclusive game that came out in 2015. It is also from the same developers of Dark Souls. I did another themed commander deck for Dark Souls, so if you want to go check out that video, I will have it linked here. Now between Bloodborne and Dark Souls, I'm not going to lie to you, there was more about Bloodborne that I was drawn to. Dark Souls was your typical fantasy themes. You had dragons, castles, knights. Lovecraft horror, although there's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon, it is still pretty fresh. Bloodborne has a very unique story compared to Dark Souls. I know a lot of people complain about not understanding the stories. A lot of it is hidden in item descriptions, but what at first just seems like a gothic Victorian setting where you have werewolves and just usual creatures of the night, cosmic horror does come into play later in the game. As I go through this video, I will be talking about the lore of Bloodborne, the cards I chose, everything about the deck, doing my very best to try to put into words what I think was one of my favorite video game experiences. Now, the commander that I'm choosing for this deck is Child of Alara. I'm going to give a spoiler alert right now for people who haven't played an almost 5-year-old game. Since this is a Lovecraftian story, you're going to have cosmic horror, and towards the end of the game, you pretty much figure out what was going on the whole time. One of the great ones, which are basically these cosmic beings, is Murgo. Murgo is the baby, the child of the Pthumerian queen Yharnam. Now again, the story is very confusing, so I'm not going to do it justice, and I would be here forever just to go into detail. But at the end of the game, the mandatory final boss is Murgo's wet nurse. The wet nurse is there to protect Murgo. If you kill the wet nurse, there is no sustenance, so the child will die. Murgo is a baby great one. You are being manipulated the whole game by another great one called the Moon Presence. The Moon Presence is using the hunter's dream in order to get the hunters to kill Murgo because this town ain't big enough for the two of us, or at least that's what I got out of it. I chose Child of Alara because it's the closest thing to a crying baby that you can get in a magic card. It's also an avatar, which is close enough to one of the great ones, but really if you played the game after the halfway point, it's not obnoxious, but you hear it in the background. There is a baby crying. It is kind of a scary game. There are horror elements in it. It's nothing I would say is close to like Resident Evil 7 or Outlast, but it does have its spooky moments. Now I'm going to go section by section throughout the deck and just explain everything. Starting off with the lands, it's going to be the quickest because there are only so many lands that are going to synergize. The rest are just going to be here for mana fixing. And by the way, a little disclaimer here before I get too far into the video. A theme deck is not supposed to be competitive. It is supposed to be technically playable. It's really just for fun. You're picking cards that follow a theme, mostly in the artwork, in the name, or some kind of synergy. Since Bloodborne is all about blood, beast blood, we can just go ahead and include cards like Blood Crypt and Bloodstained Mire. Even if there isn't really a place that we can put these in the game, these Rakdos colored lands sound like they belong in Bloodborne. Forbidden Orchard, I think, is pretty cool because it's like the Forbidden Woods. One of the scarier parts of the whole game. I believe it's at this point you discover some of the aliens in the game. Gavany Township is going to be Yharnam, Central Yharnam. Innistrad is just a very good set if you're looking for something to go with a Lovecraft theme. I'll talk about that more later, but other than providing a more Victorian look to our deck, it's not going to serve much of a purpose other than putting counters on our creatures. Nephalia Academy is the closest thing that we can get to Byrgenwerth. This was a college that you could reach right after the Forbidden Woods. Again, at this point, the game really starts to change. You're no longer just fighting beasts. You pretty much figure out all of the Lovecraftian alien stuff. And then there's Orzhova, the Church of Deals, which is going to be the Healing Church. Now this is going to be representative of the two factions in the game. I wouldn't say they're factions, but two perspectives. You have one that supports the blood, and then you have one that supports insight. The college wanted to understand the Great Ones, and by understanding, they would gain power that way, they would evolve. The church wanted to use the blood. The healing blood would make them more powerful. Now, they were both wrong. You were either going to be driven insane, or you were going to be turned into a beast. Going on to our creatures, we have 24 of them. Gonna go over some of the more important ones. Giver of Runes is representative of Carol in the game. The Carol runes that you get are going to help your character out, give you better resistances. She pretty much serves the same purpose, going to help us out if we need that extra bit of protection. Kumbaj Witches represents the Witch of Hemwick. Well, technically witches, even though it's just called the Witch of Hemwick. You end up having to fight 2 of them. It's not a difficult boss fight. I know these games are known to have some difficult bosses. You basically run around a room, hit one witch, and then quickly find the other witch, kill it before it gets to resurrect the other one again. Very interesting fight that does take advantage of insight. And Duskwatch Recruiter is going to represent Father Gascoigne. Father Gascoigne being probably my favorite boss in the whole game, or at least up there. Just a very good backstory. You have a hunter that is driven mad with the blood. If you are thorough enough and you end up finding the music box, you can actually use it to get a stun on him. That way you can use a strong attack, get a visceral. It is a 3-part fight where in the 3rd part he turns into a werewolf. Very scary if your first experience was with Bloodborne and not Dark Souls, which the first game I played was Bloodborne. I didn't quite know what was going to happen or how to deal with it, and I just got wrecked every single time. Eventually beat him, but it was such a memorable boss fight. Unruly Mob is going to represent the Yharnamites. The Yharnamites are the townsfolk. You first see them in Central Yharnam. This card probably represents them the best because you have different kinds of them. The enemy variety is so cool, especially in the opening area. You have guys that are holding pitchforks, axes, torches, and you have some at a distance that will shoot at you. And if they swarm you, it is very scary and difficult. Now the hunters are tasked with taking down the beasts. Big game hunter is exactly what we want. Most of the beasts in the game are massive, and just like in Dark Souls you have this David and Goliath thing going on, where most of the enemies are going to tower over you. Big game hunter is going to help us take down the cleric beast, Vicar Amelia. I mean, look what he's already taken down. I don't think it should be difficult. Carrion Crow is going to represent the many crows in the game. Out of all of the enemies in the game, these are probably the easiest and the most predictable. Conduit of Storms is going to represent Dark Beast Parl. A very stressful boss, hard to pinpoint, but if you can deal a lot of damage quickly with your weapon, you should be able to stagger him, break his legs, keep him down, and keep hitting him. We get another hunter to help us out here with Fiend Hunter. Enters the battlefield, we get to exile another target creature. Looks like he is holding what appears to be the Kirkhammer. Fiend Hunter is a cleric that would probably be one of the church hunters. Now Skullwinder is going to represent what is probably the scariest part of the game for a lot of people. If you have a fear of snakes, in the second part of the Forbidden Woods, you will be forced to fight a bunch of these snakes. They can poison you, they have multiple heads. Skullwinder is going to at least give us a card back from our graveyard. Now with the queens, there are 2 queens. Queen Marchesa is going to be Yharnam. She is the queen that exists in the underground Chalice dungeons. She is a Pthumerian, which is not human, but it's very difficult to explain. She is the mother of Murgo, which is child of Alara for us. Very important character for the game, sort of the Great One, Immaculate Conception. Clackbridge Troll is going to represent the brick trolls. There's literally brick trolls on the massive bridge that you first encounter in Central Yharnam. They look scary at first until you realize they have probably the easiest parry window in the whole game. Creepy Doll is going to represent the actual creepy doll that talks to you, allows you to level up in the Hunter's Dream. And Giroux with Eyes Wide Open. Probably gonna have to be Mikolash. Mikolash was with the college. He went the way of insight with Eyes Wide Open, wanting to understand the Great Ones. He went insane. We do have some Planeswalkers in the deck, which I'll talk about in a minute, but we still have plenty of cards to talk about. Ishkanah Graf Widow. This is the halfway point of the game where you fight Rom. Rom is this massive spider that can spew other spiders at you. She's going to vanish and reappear with a bunch of them. Ishkanah is perfect because Ishkanah creates more spiders. Now the other queen is Garzazul Plague Queen. She's going to represent the Queen of the Vile Bloods. Now if you were thorough enough, or you just were like me and you looked it up on the internet, you found the Castle Cainhurst. The hidden secret that Marta Ligarius was keeping was the Vile Bloods. These are pretty much vampires, just like Garzazul. Now for a game that is all about blood, you think you would encounter vampires more often. You encounter plenty of werewolves, but not vampires, except for this one part of the game, where you go to this winter wonderland castle. After beating Martyr Ligarius, the secret passageway to the Queen's Chamber opens up, and you discover her. You can then decide to serve her or get her killed. Very interesting storyline. I highly recommend that if you're watching this video, you look up the lore, because this part in particular is really interesting. Now we do have some aliens in the game. The next 3 creatures are going to represent them. Distended Mindbender is going to be the brain suckers. These enemies are a pain in the ass. They will cast magic that will stun you long enough so that they can grab you and steal your insight, which is exactly what this creature is doing to this person. We also have Amygdala, which is one of my favorite bosses in the game. Although not in the Chalice dungeons, that guy can go to hell. Amygdala is a massive, multi-armed creature that's capable of dealing tons of damage to you. Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger is a perfect representative, because although the head doesn't look like a walnut, you do have the multi-arm thing here. And Emrakul is probably the biggest flavor win in the whole deck, or maybe the second best one. We have literally an Eldritch theme. It doesn't get much more Lovecraft than that. Emrakul coming to Innistrad. She is going to be the Moon Presence. The Moon Presence is the secret final boss of the game. Pretty much the whole reason why you were going after Murgo. Nothing much about the boss fight. I didn't think it was that great, but it is interesting that the whole time you were being manipulated by one. Now we have some artifacts. Bloodborne is known for having its trick weapons, and you're going to see some of them, but there are also some other artifacts that synergize well with the theme. Bonesaw is going to be our saw cleaver / saw spear. There are a couple serrated weapons in the game. Serrated weapons are really good against beasts because they had a weakness to fire and serrated. That was going to deal extra damage to them. Now the Chalice dungeons are probably what I would consider the most difficult part of Bloodborne. I know some people think the DLC was really difficult and contained some of the more difficult bosses, but to me it's definitely the Chalice dungeons, especially the one that cuts your health in half. That is difficult. Everflowing Chalice, gonna give us some extra mana, but really serves the purpose of being one of the chalices that we use to fill with ritual materials. Blade of the Blood Chief. I forget exactly what the weapon is called, but it's a very good skill-based weapon. Very quick in its attack. If you could put poison on it, it's even deadlier. But this is the weapon that Eileen the Crow was using in the game. Bloodforged Battle Axe. The Hunter's Axe is a very good weapon to start out with. It's what you use if you're going for a strength build. A lot of enemies in the game, if you can't match their weaknesses, you at least want to stagger them. Lantern of Insight. I already mentioned how insight was a thing in the game, but of course we have our lanterns. This is going to replace bonfires in Dark Souls. Serves pretty much the same purpose. Livewire Lash is going to be the threaded cane. This is one of the more unique weapons in the game. You don't have the best range with a cane, but you can transform it into a whip, and it becomes quite a good way to crowd control. You can be overwhelmed pretty easily in this game, so the more enemies you can hit, the better off you'll be. Bloodstone Cameo is going to represent the upgrade materials for our weapons. We use Bloodstone shards in the game. Really nice that we could find a card that actually was named Bloodstone. We have Jar of Eyeballs. In the Bergenworth College, you literally find jars that are filled with eyeballs, and you can actually roll into them, break them, and you'll just see a bunch of eyeballs rolling everywhere. Midnight Clock is going to represent part of the DLC, where the goal is to climb up this clock tower and to reach the top, where you fight a couple bosses consecutively. The second of which is Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower. One of the best boss fights, and honestly this and Father Gascoigne really represents the speed of Bloodborne and the variety of attacks. Not knowing what your enemy is going to do is the best part of these games. And there is of course the Mind's Eye. This game is all about insight, and when I was talking about the brain suckers, it is quite literally about having eyes inside of your mind. Speaking of that, we have our enchantments. We have the card Eyes Everywhere. You might have a feeling that you're constantly being watched, because you probably are. Later in the game, you find out that there were secret amygdalas hidden everywhere, but you didn't have the insight to see them yet. It does play into the Lovecraft theme, where the more you figure out about the cosmic entity, the crazier you get. You start seeing things you probably shouldn't be seeing. For an extra bit of removal, we have Imprisoned in the Moon. I know it's the exact opposite of the Moon Presence, where the Moon Presence descended from the moon, but it's close enough. We have our Moon Presence in Emrakul the Promised End. Let's just go with it. We have the Blood Mist. Blood attacks are very deadly, and Yharnam, the boss fight in the Chalice dungeons, she will actually shoot blood at you, which will give you rapid poisoning. This just serving the purpose of giving our creatures double strike is still pretty good. Curse of Bloodletting is perfect because it represents the transformation after using the Healing Church's blood. They start turning into beasts and weird creatures after taking the blood which they thought was going to help them out and improve their lives. For our sorceries, we have some pretty on-the-nose references. We have Hunt the Hunter, probably not going to be useful for us, but there is literally a line in the game where you talk to Eileen and she says, "Leave the hunting of hunters to me." So, you know I just had to put it in here. And then we have Coax from the Blind Eternities. This is going to represent those that wanted to make contact with the Great Ones. So you can go and grab a Great One from your sideboard. You're already playing a casual game, so you might as well add a sideboard. Summon another Great One to help you win the game. Then we have Praetor's Grasp, which is a reference to the end part of the game, right before the secret boss fight with the Moon Presence. The Moon Presence will actually grab you and try to consume you. But if you consumed the umbilical cords, all 3 of them, you will reject the Moon Presence and fight it so that you can become an infant Great One. Now for our instance, we have Pale Moon. This was towards the beginning of the game where you find out the whole reason why you came to Yharnam. It was to find Pale Blood. Now once you go to Yarhagul, you get a pretty good view of the moon. The moon does change halfway through the game. We also have Beast Within, which perfectly represents how the people of Yharnam turned into actual beasts. Now this card is probably the best flavor win because it literally in the name is Hunter's Insight. The card draw is great and everything, but the fact that it quite literally is Hunter's Insight is perfect for the deck. Now finally ending it, I know this was a longer video, but we do have some Planeswalkers here. Ashiok Nightmare Weaver. Now you do go to these nightmares in the game. One of the first ones is when you face off with Amygdala, but in the DLC you also go to a nightmare-like world that very much parallels the dream that you were experiencing, but the areas are warped, they're different, enemies are a lot more difficult. We also have Garrett Cursed Huntsman, who in the human form I think represents Father Gascoigne the best. After all, Gascoigne was cursed with beasthood, and using that hunter's axe should be very easy to stagger our enemies. But anyway guys, let me know what you think of this deck. Bloodborne was one of my favorite games that I got to play on PlayStation last year. Probably like it a little bit better than Dark Souls. The story is just a bit more interesting for me. Anyway, you all have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video. Just wanted to say thanks to the patrons who are supporting me on patreon.com. Go check it out. There are different tiers with their own rewards. One of them is having your name in the credits of my videos. I know it's not much, but it's something that I can do to show my appreciation. Thanks again, and have a good day.